Hello, one and all. If you're tuning in live, thanks for making time for us in your busy day. If you're watching this on YouTube, thanks for stopping by. However you're watching, welcome to Postmedia's Driving into the Future Roundtables, where we'll discuss, the future of driving. I'm David Booth, and I'm the senior writer for Driving.ca. The subject of today's roundtable is the future of Canadian automotive industry. And what exciting times these are. After years of retrenchment, the industry is now booming again in Canada. In a space of less than 6 months, Ford signed a deal to build new EVs in Oakville. Fiat Chrysler, now Stellantis, is going to be producing plug-in hybrids in Windsor. And General Motors, not to be outdone, is introducing its new BrightDrop EV600 delivery van to be produced in Ingersoll. And there's renewed truck production in Oshawa. Combined with Toyota, currently the largest automaker in our country, and Honda, these are heady times indeed for auto manufacturing in Canada. But are we on the top of our game? Is there room left to grow? Can Canada, as some have predicted, become a leader in battery manufacturing? Can we take advantage of our clean electricity and our plentiful resources to build plants that will build the batteries that will power the EVs of the future? What about autonomous cars? Can we develop the highest of high-tech cars here? In simple terms, are we all we can be? To help answer those questions, we're joined by a most august of panels. First up is Jerry Diaz, the National President of Unifor. Then we have Scott McKenzie, Toyota's Senior National Manager of External Affairs. David W. Patterson, GM's VP of Corporate and Environmental Affairs. And last, but most certainly not least, Dennis DeRosier of DeRosier's Automotive Consultants. Welcome, gentlemen, and thank you so much for joining us today. Before we start proceedings, let me also welcome all our viewers and remind them that we will be taking your questions at the end of the discussion. So, Jerry, you're first up. And let me first congratulate you and your team for corralling all three legacy automakers into an incredible number of agreements. It was just fantastic for the industry. It's fantastic for Canada. The first question then I have for you is, are these new contracts a sign that Canada's becoming a high-tech powerhouse, or is it more good old-fashioned Canadian production know-how? Which is the deciding factor for all these new contracts?
Well, first of all, I think it's both. And I have to say, it's a lot easier for me at the bargaining table when the companies actually say yes. Anyway, look, there is no question that we've gone from the outhouse to the penthouse. We were an industry that was heading in decline. I think it's fair to say that in the last 20 years, we lost over 35,000 jobs in the industry here in Canada. I represent about 36,000 members in the auto and the auto parts industry. So what was done was really not just a shot in the arm, I will argue, but it's about rejuvenating the industry. It really is about getting on the cusp of the transition. Globally, the OEMs had announced over $300 billion worth of investments in EVs. Not one nickel until the last few months was announced here in Canada. So I see this as an opportunity to regain the strength that we once had as it relates to our state, our place in the world in overall manufacturing. So this was a home run, but this is a commitment. And this is the Detroit 3. And obviously, Toyota, I believe, used to build EVs up until about 2014, I think. So this is really a shot in the arm, and this is about aggressive governments, and this is about automakers understanding that this is a great place to build based on a whole host of reasons. So we're in damn good shape today.
Thanks a lot, Jerry. Scott, you're up next. Thanks for joining us. GM, Ford, and Stellantis are generating all the headlines with news of EVs and new EVs. But with all this talk of supposed new electrification, hasn't Toyota been producing hybrids here for quite some time? I mean, how many electrified vehicles do you produce in Canada? Which ones? And is that growing?
Yeah, thanks, David. We've been making vehicles with batteries and motors since 2013 in our case, and last year we made 65,000 vehicles, hybrids, in a a year that saw reduced production because of COVID-19. You know, in a typical year, we'd make about 500,000 cars out of our 3 plants in Woodstock and Cambridge, and about 80,000 of those would be hybrids. So that's pretty significant. As Jerry mentioned, we've made a fully electric vehicle before. We made a small volume of RAV4 battery electric vehicles from 2012 to 2014. And we think that when the demand is there for battery electric vehicles, you know, we'll be able to supply not only the Canadian market, but the US market as well. But right now, we make a lot of hybrids. They're in high demand. Consumers like them. You know, they're offered in the right places. And, you know, we're pretty happy with what we have right now.
Excellent. Thanks very much. So Dave, over to you, and well done that man on providing 9 million masks to the populace for COVID. Fantastic. Well done. Congratulations to you and all of your team. Now, in the contracts that were signed this year, much ado was made about the pickups that came back to Oshawa. But there's also another huge announcement about BrightDrop building something called an EV600 delivery van that's going to be used by FedEx and other people. And I don't think that's gathered nearly as much attention. It certainly didn't in our polls before we came online. So can you give us a little bit of an idea of what BrightDrop is and how it's going to, you know, affect your business and Canadian jobs?
Thanks, David, and thanks for having us all here today. The changes that we're talking about really come in the context of an incredible technological change that's sweeping right across the industry. And we made the announcement of the first kind of new General Motors brand in memory at the beginning of this year, which was BrightDrop. And we announced that BrightDrop, which is a electric cargo moving system, and it's more than just a vehicle. It really is an entire system that has a very interesting Canadian backstory to it. In that, in the last 5 years, we've developed a very large engineering and technology capability here in Canada with about 1,000 workers. One of the things that they had developed and tested on the streets of Toronto was what we call an e-pallet, or a system that helps companies like FedEx to move their parcels faster. And what FedEx found was that they could improve their delivery efficiency by over 20% with this new technology that was developed right here in Canada. And then working with Jerry and in the team getting our future sorted out for the CAMI plant, we announced that we will be making the first variant of BrightDrop vans, which are 24 feet long, and they're big vans that are going to give you the ability to side load special containers onto them that will make this entire ecosystem of delivery work better. And we're going to be moving these electric vans into production as early as the end of this year. We'll be doing some of the work to do the runoff, and then we'll be in production next year as well. And all that in a transition in that plant, and a big transition in Oshawa as well to bring back pickup trucks and all of the supply chain that goes with that. So it's a really busy, exciting time, but it's all part of the technological shift as well.
Thanks a lot. Dennis, you've been keeping all these guys honest for what, 35, 36 years now? So what I'd like you to do is look into this crystal ball of yours that you always using, and tell me what you think we're going to look back on most fondly on in 5 years. Will it be the conversion of many of these plants to EVs and plug-ins and electric powered delivery vans? Or will it continue to be the legacy production, like the RAV4s, the CRVs, and especially now this Silverado and Sierra that's coming back to Oshawa? What's going to have a bigger impact on the Canadian economy in 5 years, do you think?
Well, first of all, let's be very clear that, you know, from an EV perspective, the horse is out of the barn, the door's been locked, all roads lead to electric vehicles. There's no doubt about that. The question that is tough to answer is that if you look back over the last 20 years where they've been available now for in their 21st year being offered, the market share is very, very low, even globally. requires a lot of incentive money to move the product. And if you start looking out, like your question, 5 years, is will consumers buy them? And so, when you think about the GM announcement is 2035 complete conversion to EVs, that's 2 generation of vehicles. And my own view is that over this next 5 to 8 years, which is the first generation, will be the big test. And that, with 52 years studying this industry, I can tell you dozens of situations where something was announced and, it was going to be the end of the auto industry or part of the auto industry as we knew it. And very rarely did it happen. So you become a natural cynic as a result. And so, but if consumers embrace this first generation that's coming out, not just from General Motors, but most, then you'll see an all-out push for the next generation. If they don't embrace them to the degree that is necessary to maintain the profitability, and from Jerry's perspective, the employment, then you'll start to see a backing off. GM's most profitable vehicle is their CK pickup truck, and they buy them in hordes now. And if people don't buy the electric version, then GM will have no choice. So how do we get consumers to buy them? That's the $64,000 question. And sure, you can point to Toyota has been as high as 25% in some months with their hybrid. You can point to Quebec, which is a 7 or 8% share. BC is closer to 11, 12% share. But Alberta is 0.1%. And they're the pickup truck buyers. And same with Saskatchewan, a little higher in Manitoba. Atlantic Canada is well under 1%. So that's the risk. I love what Jerry and the Detroit 3 did. I like what Toyota has been doing on the EV front. But, it's not without risk. We still got to convince consumers to buy them.
Excellent. Thanks. Jerry, I've been dying to ask you this question for quite some time.
No, I don't dye my hair.
It's about the Ford Oakville agreement. And it was signed, if I'm not mistaken, back in September. And I'm assuming negotiated for some time before that. And that was long before the American election was decided. And Trump could have been in office post this agreement. And EV sales were already dropping under Republicans. And if Trump had become president, he was going to get rid of California's waiver and all the ZEV mandates in the United States, which means less than the traditional amount of production from Oakville would have gone to the States. It means that Canada would have had to absorb a lot of those EVs that Ford is going to make in Oakville. So my question is, was there any assurance by way of the federal government that they were going to implement some kind of ZEV mandate to ensure that no matter what happened, that Ford's production would find a consumer?
Well, first of all, the majority of the BEVs that we will be assembling in Oakville are heading to Europe. So that was already the discussions that we had at the bargaining table. So of course the U.S. is our biggest customer, but Europe was going to be our major destination. Now the Trump factor is always a factor, and it was a factor during bargaining. But Trump, as powerful as he believed he was not going to interfere with where the consumers are heading. Look, we're expecting that about 60% of the U.S. market by 2040 is going to be battery electric vehicles. Young people today look at things much differently. Young people today, their number one preoccupation is climate change. So you're not going to get in the way of that. And so that's where I believe the consumers are heading. So is there some risk? Maybe, but that's where the world is heading. And I think that the whole issue about consumers, look, once we start getting into mass manufacturing of battery electric vehicles, costs will come down, because that's one of the concerns today. So, the Trump factor was key. What he was planning on doing was important. Was it going to be the end of, the industry for battery electric vehicles? No chance. Like I said, towards the end of Trump's reign, I will argue he was kind of like the emperor with no clothes. The auto industry was no longer afraid of him like they were in the first year or two of his mandate. And people weren't going to make decisions based on Trump's foolishness. They were going to make decisions based on profitability and obviously based on consumer demands. So we went into Ford bargaining with our eyes wide open. When Ford, when it leaked that they weren't going to build the next generation of the Edge, we got very aggressive as an organization, spent a lot of time talking to the federal and provincial governments. We said this is the only opportunity we really have to get into the battery electric vehicle world. If we don't transition with the industry, we're going to be left behind. We got one shot, and everybody did what they needed to do.
Great answer. Thanks very much for that information. But I'm going to belabor the point a little, and I'm going to skip around a bit. Dennis, same question, different angle. What would happen with all these contracts, do you think, if Trump had got reelected? Do you agree with Jerry it wouldn't have made any difference, or do you think it would have affected exports, whether some of them are going to Europe or some of them are going to the States?
Well, I to a degree, I agree with Jerry on much of what he said there, but understand in my mind is that the regulatory regime, which is viewed as a key element of pushing this new technology, is actually targeting the wrong technology, the wrong person. They're telling the vehicle companies they have to have XYZ% of ZEVs or XYZ fuel efficiency. Nobody tells the consumer. The politician doesn't regulate the consumer. And the vehicle companies can and have and are dedicating, as Jerry said, billions and billions of dollars to electrify and AV their product and meet some of these regulations. But we still have a consumer who goes into a car dealer and says, I want that one, not that one. And so it's going to be, so in some respects, whether Trump was right or elected or not elected, right on his anti-climate change stuff or wrong on his anti-climate change stuff, in some respects, collectively, this industry has to convince consumers and have a product, which means it has to be better or equal or better than a nice vehicle. It has to be priced equal or better than a nice vehicle. We still have huge issues with charging infrastructure. You lived in Montreal for a while. How do you charge a vehicle in downtown Montreal where there's, probably 2/3 of the houses are row houses and street parking? Do you run a cord out the front door? There's big challenges in front of us. Now, this industry has got the capability of overcoming those challenges. They were asked in the 90s to address criteria air contaminants, and 99.7% have been reduced. They're being asked to have AV technology in the vehicles, and I've driven 3 or 4 of the vehicles that are introduced that technology. All of it's very impressive. So never underestimate the technology clout of a vehicle company. But from a regulatory point of view, until the government targets the consumer, regulations kind of come and they go. Yes, the vehicle companies are worried about them, but the consumers aren't.
Thanks very much. Scott, over to you. Talking about EVs and demand, as far as I can see, the number one vehicle that is in demand, i.e. they're not getting enough of them to come into Canada, is the RAV4 Prime, the plug-in hybrid. I hear at least a few dealers are taking orders on 2022 models. You produce hybrids already. I believe it's the Woodstock plant, correct? And
Sure.
So how soon can we get plug-in hybrids produced here in Canada? I mean, we're signing, Unifor is signing a whole bunch of contracts. There's obviously desire. I'm fairly certain the Liberals are going to pass some sort of ZEV mandate. Why can't we have plug-in primes built here in Canada?
Yeah, thanks, David. Making a RAV4 Prime in Canada wouldn't be particularly challenging. It requires some investment, but the vehicle's not structurally that different than what we're making today. The availability of batteries for the RAV4 Prime continues to be a challenge. And, I know there's a very generous incentive in particular provinces in Ontario that have driven up demand of the RAV4 Prime in those provinces, but we don't have the ability to turn on the tap suddenly and just generate more of them. So could we make the car? Absolutely, but we need to secure more, batteries globally because it's a global vehicle in order to supply more into the Canadian market.
Thanks a lot. Dave, if electrics are our future, if autonomous vehicles are coming down the pipeline as well, what should we be doing about training? Where should the emphasis, I should say, of our students be placed? Beyond the obvious of studying electrical or computer engineering, what changes in vocational training do we need in our colleges? The auto industry has always been huge in Canada. How do we get our kids to stay a part of it?
Yeah, well, this is a great question because first of all, we have an extraordinary capability here in Canada. We have very deep relationships at General Motors with the University of Waterloo, the University of Toronto, which is winning all kinds of awards in the development of autonomous technology, with McMaster, others in Quebec. So right from the early grades, I think we have to get both men, but also girls and women interested in engineering. And we're doing some work with all kinds of companies to inspire that. In engineering, we need to really make sure that we continue to build on our strength in areas like electrical engineering and software in particular. We have close to 1,000 people now working in General Motors facility in Markham and also in Oshawa that are doing engineering work, and that includes development work on electric vehicles. We have a very ambitious goal, as you've noticed, in terms of moving all our vehicles to electric by 2035, all our light-duty vehicles. Autonomous vehicles are on the road, have been for a number of years in San Francisco. Technology is moving rapidly, but there is huge opportunity in Canada. We did some real studies in this Canadian Automotive Partnership Council as to what the biggest technologies on the planet are for the industry going forward. And then we did a Venn diagram across the Canadian universities and the Canadian supply chain to see where those cross over. And we came across batteries, we came across lightweight materials, software, and sensors. And guess what? We do all those things extremely well here in Canada. There's a lot of work on batteries. We'll get to probably talk a little bit more about that because really these questions that you're raising, I don't think they're really political questions. I think they are technology questions. And I think, as Dennis said, the industry is going to be able to solve those and the customer is going to be the beneficiary. And if we can solve those things and bring you an electric vehicle, or if we can bring fleets of autonomous vehicles, and we can do it at a price that is affordable, we're going to change the world.
Wow. Well, let's hope we change the world right here in Canada. Jerry, so many companies, Toyota that's here with us, Volkswagen has also said things like this, are talking about carbon neutral, eliminating carbon in their assembly plants. We have a lot of clean electricity here in Canada. We have other, things like natural resources as well, but the clean energy allows us to more easily meet those promises of zero emissions in the future. I think Toyota, it's by 2050. Does that add another quiver in your for your bow in terms of allowing you to attract not just more clientele from existing automakers, but actually going out to automakers that may not be represented and asking them to come to Canada instead of, say, Mexico, which I don't think is going to be able to meet those requirements as quickly and as easily as we can, or even some of the United States?
Look, there's no question. We are way ahead. I think about 95% of all of the energy we produce in Ontario is carbon-free. So we are well ahead of the curve, and I would argue that that would be one of the many reasons why GM has made such significant announcements, including bringing back the Oshawa assembly plant. But if you look at Canada, we are completely well positioned as it relates to the raw materials. What are the key ingredients in batteries? Lithium, cobalt, aluminum, nickel. We're loaded in all of that. So if you take a look at where we are positioned, we are much further ahead than the United States in that part. So on that specific issue, as to the carbon-free commitments within the assembly plants, we are absolutely well positioned. Now, for attracting other OEMs, there's no reason why we can't attract another one, A, based on the infrastructure that we have in place as it relates to our raw materials and clean energy, but B, if I take a look at the new NAFTA that we just put into place, the CUSPA arrangement, I mean, that bodes us very well because that starts to deal with some of the structural problems that Canada would have had as it related to our cost structure as it related to Mexico, because we know now that probably about 45% of a price of a vehicle in Mexico has to be built with wages that are $16 US an hour. I can start to walk through so many of the other changes as it relates to rules of origin. So the question now becomes not just about solidifying the existing base we have, but you're right, David, how do we start to attract others? And we are well positioned because I will argue for the first time in generations, we've got the federal and provincial government are all taking the auto industry as serious as they should, recognizing the role that it plays. It's an $80 billion a year industry, of which the overwhelming majority of the vehicles that we build are exported. So I think the stars are all aligned finally for us to compete, not just in the short term, but the long term.
Well, I don't think there's anybody in Canada, certainly not on this panel, that's not pulling for you in that regard, Jerry. Okay.
Thank you.
Scott.
Yep.
I mentioned that Toyota has plans to go carbon-free in its plants by 2050. Yep. I think it's probably the most aggressive plan of any automaker anywhere in the world. You're always out there in Cambridge and Woodstock. What does that look like? What are the plans? What actually needs to happen at those plants for both the people, the technology, to make them meet these very aggressive standards, and how will we do it?
Yeah, thanks, David. Jerry touched on the electricity, and others have commented on that. We have a pretty green electricity grid in Canada, and I think it's the structural advantage, versus our operations in the U.S. But most of our emissions come from natural gas, and that's going to be a challenge going forward. It's not an insurmountable challenge, and I think we do have some ideas in how we would approach that. And for us, one of those is going to be hydrogen. So you can burn hydrogen, through combustion, and the only emissions are going to be water. It's exceptionally clean. You can use hydrogen in a fuel cell. You need to understand our operations, and that we use a lot of natural gas for two different things. One of them is space heating. So we operate in Canada. It's cold here in the winter. We've got very large buildings. Our site in Cambridge is 3.5 million square feet under roof. That's a lot of space that you're trying to heat. And the rest of it is for paint ovens. So, as you're applying different layers of paint to the car, you've got to cure them, bake them. And so we use a lot of natural gas for those two different things. And we have to find technical solutions to replace those. The good news is we have those technical solutions. The challenge is they're expensive. So in terms of a pathway to be emissions free, we see a path to do that. It's not a technology problem. It's going to be an investment challenge, but it's something where we think we have some distinct advantages operating in Canada, and we would love to be the first Toyota facility to achieve that goal globally. Excellent.
On the same subject, David, do Canadians really care about an auto plant that doesn't produce carbon? We're fully on board with producing vehicles that reduce their tailpipe emissions. Everybody gets that. But will Canadians actually, pay more for their cars just to know that the plants that it was produced in will be, reduced carbon or completely eliminate carbon emissions? Is that something that's going to get traction? I mean, it's tough enough to get traction with electric vehicles. Does carbon reduce plants? Is that going to be very difficult for an OEM like you to justify from whatever cost aspects?
Well, we've set out our goal to be net neutral in all our facilities by 2040. And so we better be able to find out how we're going to solve those technological problems. But as Scott says, there are some really great options and alternatives to do that. I sort of look at it in two ways. We talked about electricity. We had some help from the Ontario government recently in terms of reduction of electricity costs. That's really good. There are things we can do with industrial batteries in our plants. We're looking at the batteries that we at General Motors make. The new Ultium battery system is something that can also be utilized to be able to peak shave and take electrons in the middle of the night when you don't need them and they're lower cost, and use them during the day, just like we could do even with our homes. But I think it's a bit of a false equation to say that you're going to have to pay more for the vehicles because of these changes. The trick is for us to be able to make the investments to ultimately have these vehicles, electric vehicles, come out in this time frame where they're not just competitive with internal combustion engines, they're less expensive. And that they're also less expensive to operate for our customers. And going back to Dennis's original comments, the customer is the king. They're the ones that's going to choose the product. If you can deliver a product that is all electric, and we're going to need to see our electric vehicles go all electric, not just partially electric, we're all in, all electric vehicles. We're going to need to get battery prices down. And ultimately, our equation is that in that time frame, we want to be able to offer a product that is going to give the consumer a saving, a better experience, and it's going to be just like charging up your smartphone at home when you come. And every day you're going to have a full tank of gas and you're going to be ready to go. It's just going to be electrons.
Okay. Moving on to a slightly different subject. I think my last question is going to be for all of you. There's been much talk of battery production plants in Canada. As been mentioned by a few people already, we have clean energy. We also have a lot of the resources. It would make sense that we take those, and instead of shipping the raw materials off to somebody else to get all the value added, because the battery is the most expensive thing in the car, it makes more sense to build the batteries here. We have all the necessary requirements to become a powerhouse. Now, I know Windsor, there's been an announcement recently that they're looking at building a plant for an unnamed manufacturer right now. But is it realistic that we could become a global champion of battery production in Canada? And what is it going to take to do so? I think I'll start with Dennis on this one.
Why not? Although the list is short, Magna is a global behemoth that is as advanced as any parts manufacturers in the world. Linamar in their space is advanced as anybody in the world. And there's others. I won't bore you with the list isn't long, mind you, but all you need is one or two to be able to take advantage of this opportunity. And so it's going to take some doing. Once you get beyond maybe the top half dozen to dozen suppliers in Canada, most are stampers and injection molders and relatively lower in the tier. That doesn't mean they're not sophisticated. There's a lot of sophistication that can go into a factory that's just a stamper or injection molder, but they're lower tier players. But we do have perhaps upwards to a dozen companies that are looking at this. We can attract a major player from outside because we do have natural advantages in many respects. And so I say, sure. And remember, the auto parts sector still accounts for 2 to 3 times as many jobs as the vehicle assembly sector. That's not to lower the importance of vehicle assembly in this country, but the parts sector are where the big jobs are. And I think that should be a real focus for everybody, especially from a government development point of view.
Jerry, same question, a little twist. Windsor, it looks close, or at least in the running for a plant. And I'm told that one of the main reasons is logistics. They're close to auto parts manufacturing in Ontario. They're close to the assemblies in Detroit, a perfect location. But they have a problem with the high cost of electricity in Ontario. It's green, or relatively green, but it's expensive. Does that make Quebec competitive in any way? I believe their rates are a little better. Does the cheaper rate of electricity in Quebec overcome the logistical advantages? Could we see any battery production in Quebec, or is it going to be all Ontario all the time?
I think the transportation costs will outweigh the savings on electricity. And you are talking about a bulky commodity. You're not talking about your typical car battery. You are looking and talking about massive batteries that weigh a lot. So transportation is going to be a key. So Windsor makes absolute sense because of the proximity, of course, to our major customer. We have obviously way more assembly plants in the United States than we do in Canada. But Dennis is dead on, because the preoccupation obviously has to be with vehicle assembly. But what's the impact on the parts manufacturer? So this it can't just be a concentration on batteries, though that's the key element. What about the heating and cooling systems? What about traction motors, regenerative braking system, inverters, converters, semiconductors? I can start to walk through the list, because there is going to be a quantum shift in what goes into a battery electric vehicle. And there's going to be a huge shift in jobs, because right now in your typical internal combustible engine, there's about 1,400 parts. In a battery electric vehicle, in the EV motor, it's about 250 parts. So the key issue for us is, how do we start to train? How do we start to invest? How do we deal with the transition of the auto parts workers in Canada that are going to lose their jobs to opportunities for the new industry? And that has to be every bit of a discussion on the focus of the industry as to the investment themselves. Because Dennis is absolutely right. There's a lot more jobs in auto parts than there is in direct auto assembly. So there's a lot of issues, but we're talking about it. And this is the first time that I'm listening to Doug Ford talk very aggressively about attracting a battery manufacturer, which is huge. He's been saying it right from the beginning. And I know the federal government is actively in the discussions as well. So I'm repeating myself when I say this is the first time that I've really seen the federal and provincial governments working hand in hand as it relates to the importance of this industry and doing what they need to do to attract.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Scott, going to go back to the RAV4 Prime again. You said there was battery shortages, and obviously you can't change production right away, but long term, considering all the positive benefits, is this something that Toyota can produce here, batteries for vehicles like that that are in such high demand?
Yeah, absolutely. So, irrespective of any announcements, by other OEMs around battery electric vehicles, we need hybrid batteries today. We make a substantial number of hybrid batteries, hybrid vehicles in North America today, and they all have batteries that currently come from overseas. So, there's a business case to localize those batteries to North America today to, avoid things like tariffs and also, increased logistics costs. Going forward, that's only going to be more challenging as we introduce more plug-in hybrid electric vehicles and battery electric vehicles. As an OEM operating in Ontario, a couple of people mentioned Windsor and Quebec, but as an OEM, we want it right next door to us. These things weigh 1,000 pounds. They will weigh out a truck before they cube out a truck. It's very, very inefficient to ship. You want it next door. Are there other mitigating factors, like cost of electricity and whatnot? Of course there are, and that'll be, a broad business decision. But there's absolutely no reason why that can't happen in Canada, and both the OEMs in operating in Canada and the provincial and federal governments, I think, should be chasing this stuff.
Excellent, thanks, David. It strikes me that General Motors is going to be one of the biggest producers of batteries in the world. I mean, your big product is trucks and large SUVs. Those things need huge batteries. I mean, not even the 100 kilowatt hours that is in a Tesla Model 100D. You need maybe 200 kilowatt hours batteries. And you produce millions of these bloody pickup trucks. So there's going to have to be many battery production plants for these Ultium batteries. What are the chances that we'll see these come into Canada for all the reasons that everybody's mentioned here?
Well, I think it's ultimately a certainty as the technology changes over the next 15 years. And I think Canada is extremely well positioned to see the supply chain for batteries make it a really attractive place. I think we have to understand something about batteries too, though, that the batteries are not just a white good, plug and play, put them into any vehicle. We spend billions of dollars in the development of the chemistry and in the very proprietary nature of how we manage those batteries. There's incredible technology. I mean, how are we going to get these things cut in half in price? How are we going to get these things to be able to take us twice as far? That's all technology. And that technology is our job. We have to get that done over the next 10, 15 years. But as that happens, just as as Scott is saying, we want big, heavy aspects of what we produce close to where we produce it. And Canada has not just the minerals, that's a starting point, but you have to process the minerals as well. Nickel is great, but you need nickel sulfate, nickel sulfide. You need to be able to get that processed. That's more investment, that's more jobs. And we need to be able to then see the expertise that goes into making batteries locate here in Canada as well, because it's not just something that you do in your garage. This is something that has been developed over decades, and there is a great leadership in this capability in Asia. We've got to build that ability here. So you kind of want to own your chemistry as you go forward. We're investing in that in a very big way in both Michigan and Ohio. And I think as we start moving to build vehicles that are electric here, it's naturally going to follow right across North America. There's all kinds of reasons for that. And I know Canada is right on its front foot now to make sure that people know that we have the supply chain opportunities to do it here.
Okay, well, you know what? I'm going to wrap this one up by asking the simplest of questions. One word answer, yes or no. Jerry, will we see a Canadian battery manufacturing plant in the next 5 years? Yes or no?
Maybe.
No.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, Dave. Dave, yes or no? We're going to see one, yes or no?
Well, if Jerry says yes, I better say yes.
Good move.
Scott?
I think Ford's already committed to that, so I'm going to say, whoa.
Okay, Dennis?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Okay, so we got one maybes, two yeses, and an absolutely.
We'll work on Jerry.
By the way, there are a lot of issues, though, in that we do have a NIMBYism issue in Canada. We just lost a major glass plant in Stratford because the local community got up in arms, and a lot of this advanced technology has got, as David correctly pointed out, chemistry that's going to be scaring some people. So we got an education of the local communities to go through as well. So it's not certain, but I would hate to lose them to communities that are more open-minded to these advanced technologies.
Okay. Well, that's right on time for the end of my questions. I'm going to move on to some viewer questions, and I got to tell you, they're really, really, really excellent. So, Dennis, I'm going to go right back to you. Bob asks, will Bill Ford, now that his Conservatives have committed so many millions to supporting EV production in Ontario, resurrect some form of incentive to get people to buy electric vehicles? And if it's not a consumer incentive, maybe a fleet incentive?
Tough question to answer, primarily because the deficits that are being run and the political backlash from the last incentive. You know, Ontarians were buying 300 to 500 vehicles a month under the $14,000 incentive. It ended September a year and a half ago, and it dropped to under 10 a month. So that shows you how important the incentives are. But, you know, they're costly. And as we start to grow in volume, I wonder about the need for incentives. I think David has correctly pointed out how much can be gained on price if we lower the cost of batteries. But also, you know, the deficits that are being announced right now are literally, 10 times any previous record deficit. I think on a federal level, our highest deficit ever was $58 billion, and now they're talking 400 or 500 billion. You know, how are you going to pay for this? And the other thing, you know, these incentives come from tax dollars. And currently, gasoline taxes in Canada produce somewhere between 25 and 30 billion dollars of tax revenue at all levels of government. And, you know, we go to a full EV fleet. Where do you find that money? And so, you know, that's a challenge. And so if you start to lose revenue as a result of gas taxes, how do you manage to incentivize the core reason while you're losing revenue? So there's a lot of moving parts here.
Okay. Scott, I've got one for you, and this one's kind of different. One of your own associates at either Cambridge or Woodbridge, I don't know which, whose name I'm obviously not going to release to you, says, Scott, with Toyota leading the way in so many parts of the auto manufacturing sector, why do we seem to be lagging in producing a fully electric vehicle for consumers?
You know, the short answer is demand. I don't think, honestly, that we are lagging. You know, if you look at, I haven't seen the 2020 numbers, but in 2019, Canada sold 36,000 fully electric vehicles. You know, we make 500,000 vehicles a year just out of our plants in Cambridge and Woodstock. We've announced publicly that we've got 2 battery electric vehicles coming to the market in North America, you know, within the next year. The demand, frankly, isn't there. It absolutely will be there at some point. I think it's debatable when that will actually happen. But, you know, we're focused on selling cars that Canadians want. You know, we've been very, very successful in that regard. Will we have battery electric vehicles in the marketplace? Absolutely. Will we make them in Cambridge and Woodstock? Absolutely, at some point. You know, but right now we're focused on, you know, making cars that people want. In our case, you know, we're running full out. I'm not sure if that's really well understood, but we've got 3 lines across our 3 plants that are running full production, full steam ahead. We don't have excess capacity available to, you know, take on additional lines at the moment. Could we do that at some point? Sure. But I think we're pretty happy with the products that we have.
Okay, thanks. David, there was a GM announcement about an autonomous test track opening somewhere here in Canada. Enos wants to know, will this lead to production of self-driving cars in Canada? Will it lead to more assembly jobs? Will it lead to more jobs in general?
I think the answer is ultimately yes, but just to explain what we've done, we've built a 55-acre test track at the south end of our Oshawa plant. And what that does is it allows our engineers that are developing software for autonomous vehicles that we're already making, and also for electric vehicles, and it allows them to put their code on the road. So effectively, once they've developed various software for both existing safety systems like automatic crash stops and lane keeping and a number of other things that we're developing, they can go out with a vehicle on the road and they don't need to go to the United States. Similarly, we have General Motors' cold weather testing facility up in Kapuskasing, where yesterday it was 30-something below zero. And we have our new Chevrolet Bolt EUV being tested up there. We have some of our Cadillacs being tested up there. So Canada has this ability to not only manufacture, which we want to do, it's lots of jobs, but also develop the technology. And as I talked about the BrightDrop example, when you develop the technology here, it gives you a bit of a jump on the ability to see those products and see how you can develop them. So we're going to be working with a lot of partners in that technology track in Oshawa and up in Kapuskasing, and all that's right nestled next to the beautiful factory that's going to be making a very large number of vehicles that are going to consume a very large number of parts.
Excellent. Jerry, here's one for you from a guy named Raymond. He asks a question which we've already dealt with, which is, does Canada have a chance to become a large EV manufacturer? But then he goes on to ask, how does the talent pipeline look like for Canada and the modern age of manufacturing? Will there actually be enough people wanting to work in the manufacturing sector?
There is absolutely no question. One thing about working class people, they want to provide for their families, and these have provided great working class jobs for generations. So the auto industry, frankly, is at the top of the food chain as it relates to research and development. It's at the top of the food chain as it relates to technology. It's an exciting business. You will see that our members that work in the auto plants, the turnover ratio is very, very small. So people that start and people who work in the industry stay there. Now, the talent pool is here in Canada. I take a look at, frankly, the 350, automation, robotic companies in the corridor between Toronto and Waterloo. I think about the University of Toronto, the EV Research Center. I think about Tesla doing work in Dalhousie University in Halifax. I think about Hydro-Quebec's work that they're doing on electric batteries. So we've got a lot of moving parts in this country. There's a lot of investment going on. We've got skills. We've got the education system. There's a preoccupation with governments to enhance those types of opportunities. We're in good shape.
Okay, here's another truly unique one, and I'm surprised by how many people are asking pinpoint, very specific questions. Peter asks, could your panel of experts assist us with facilitating an initiative to set up an EV and/or a hybrid vehicle manufacturing plant in Southern Alberta? Now, we just talked about Southern Alberta having, I think, Dennis, you said 0.1% EV penetration, but here's somebody from Alberta asking about that. I'm assuming he's in the business in some cases, and he goes on to say he feels there's a massive potential for this kind of initiative. So I'm not quite sure who to ask in this, but does anybody have it? How do you do that?
Well, yeah, okay, go ahead. And then I want to get in.
I was just going to say, understanding the industry, we've got just Toyota, we've got 50 suppliers in southwestern Ontario, and I think there's about 300 suppliers that supply the OEMs operating in southwestern Ontario. Building EVs in Alberta would be really, really challenging from a supply chain point of view. Is it feasible? I don't know, but suppliers, especially for big bulky components, and Dennis talked about earlier on about, we have a lot of stampings and injection molders around us. That's because they're large and bulky and they don't ship well. We also have, gas tanks and things like that. Doing that in a place that's remote from the supply chain would be really, really hard.
Jerry?
Look, there's no question what Scott said is completely true, but regardless of where the OEMs are, the bulky commodities are built by the assembly plant. So that piece, I'll remove that from the equation, and the smaller commodities can be shipped anywhere. Now, the piece with Alberta that Canadians in general, I don't think know, there's more wind turbines in Alberta than anywhere else in Canada. So there's already this mindset about sustainability. The next piece is, if we are moving away from fossil fuels or traditional industry in Alberta, what's next? So you can't talk about Build Back Better. You can't talk about a green economy. You can't talk about just transition without talking about where those jobs are going to be. And if we're transforming away from fossil fuels and we're heading to a clean energy, green strategy here in Canada, then we can't leave Alberta behind. Is it a push? Yes. Are there challenges? Yes. Is it impossible? No.
Okay. Switching gears again. Adrian asks, what does the industry expect from fresh engineering graduates? Dave, why don't you try that one?
Sure, curiosity. And, we're at a time where we're reinventing mobility in so many different ways. And, we touched a lot on electric, but behind that is our whole suite of technologies to make vehicles a lot more safe with self-driving capabilities. We lose 40,000 people a year in car crashes on the roads of North America because of driver error. And if we can take that out, think of how you're going to change the world. And so the opportunity to invent things right now in this industry is bigger than when we moved from horses to cars. The technology is happening at the same time to go electric, to go autonomous, and all of these things need incredible curiosity and innovation. And that can, I think, be said equally for a person on the floor of a plant as it is for somebody who's sitting behind a desk in a technologies.
Excellent. Thanks. Somebody named Doug asks, will the shift in electric vehicle manufacturing impact the employment level of workers in Ontario's auto part manufacturing sector? Dennis, what do you think? We've talked about the fewer parts and everything else. And if that's the case, that there'll be fewer, how do we make up for that?
Well, first of all, if it is negative, it's going to happen over a very long term. We're talking 2035 to 2045, where electric vehicles become dominant. And so the job losses that may be tied to fewer components will come very late. And that's a lot of water can flow under the bridge. I have no doubt that the industry is going to adapt. The parts industry is going to adapt and be as good a home for great jobs in the future as they are in now and have been in the past. There will be different jobs, which comes back to the education question that David touched on. I would add to the education question, flexibility. If you look at all four of us and the schooling that we got 30, 40, sometimes 50 years ago, it's radically different need and skills that we employ today. And so if you're a student, get into an engineering side of the university stream and be as flexible. And if you're top of your class, you won't have to worry about getting a job. But, and is that question any different than the productivity question over the last 2-3 decades? Everybody thought that as we get into all this advanced technology, the productivity was going to kill all the jobs. And I believe we have put aside the COVID downturn, more jobs in the auto parts and vehicle assembly sector today than we did in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And so I'm confident that we'll be able to employ anybody who wants a job.
Jerry, you want to jump in on this one? Because, of course, this directly affects your members. Does it indeed? In fact, I think you were the guy that brought it up, that there's fewer parts and there'll be less assembly. How do you counteract that? What do your members do, or aspiring uniform members that are just going through vocational school? How do they address it? How do you address it?
Well, first of all, I'm dealing with this reality in Ingersoll. We know that the Equinox is going to be building out in 2023, and we're going to a straight battery electric vehicle. So what does this mean for our suppliers? So we are having this conversation as we are sitting here today. So this isn't a conversation for later on down the road. It's happening today. So the argument and the conversations is already, how is the parts sector going to transition? Because we know there's going to be different components. There's going to be different parts. So many of the conventional parts are going to be going to conventional exhaust system, heating and cooling system, the powertrain, huge changes. So it's a real question about adaptability of the auto parts industry. I'm speaking to the major players, and they realize that, look, there's going to be a change in the type of a product that they're developing, but they also understand that they need to do that in order to keep in the game. So we're on it.
Take this one, David.
It's been about an hour, I think, and we're certainly not at a loss for questions, because I got a bunch more, but we do have to wrap things up. So first of all, I want to thank everybody that tuned in to this episode, those that will look at it later on Facebook. If you're following these roundtables, there'll be another one next Wednesday at 11 a.m. again, and it'll deal with the changing face of car dealerships and how Canadians buy cars as a result of COVID. And of course, you can always hit up my Motor Mouth column every Friday to find the latest in automotive technologies. And finally, I've got to say thanks to the panel. What a great panel. I absolutely wonderful, gentlemen. Jerry, it was absolutely a pleasure to have you here. Scott, thanks for bringing us up to speed on everything that's Toyota. David, a pleasure as always every time I talk to you. And Dennis, well, frankly, no panel discussing auto manufacturing in Canada is complete without you. So guys, I thank you so much again for bringing this to our readers and our viewers.
Thank you.
Thank you, dude.
Thank you.